Like we live in our bodies, and our bodies have so much wisdom. And yet, I think many of us, and especially women, are taught to ignore that wisdom, right? So I grew up with this teaching that your body's a temple. You've got to protect it. You've got to be vigilant, all these things. And yet, when I was with this elderly man who pulled me on his lap and started tickling me, and I was uncomfortable, and my body was clearly like, no, this is not okay. I'm 14 years old. And I go and I tell my father, then the response is, oh, he was just trying to be affectionate. And so then obviously I'm going to question myself and be like, well, wait a minute, my body is telling me that this is not okay, but maybe I misunderstood. So maybe I need to challenge the messages my body is telling me. Maybe I need to challenge my
Wow.
own inner wisdom. And so you can imagine over time, then that inner wisdom starts to get silenced, right? And it wasn't until I had my own children that I said, this cannot continue because I don't want to silence their wisdom. I always want them to have their own no. I want them to be able to say no.
Brilliant. Wow.
Yeah.
What gave you the courage to break that silence? You have to do this for your children. Is
hmm
that part of the courage come from
It,
that?
that was a huge part of the courage. That was a big part of it. I think, um, my own need to heal, my own need to recognize like I'm dealing with all of this trauma. And I don't want it to just be trauma for trauma's sake. I want to be able to grow from it. I want to be able to give back to the world and contribute in a meaningful way. And is it risky? Yeah, but it felt even more risky and even more problematic to not do it.
Um, so can whatever you can take us to that particular moment
Yeah.
and how did that become the start? One of my favorite words, transformation.
Well, I had a yoga studio of my own and I was teaching a class and it's kind of a funny story because I was teaching a beginner's class. And there was a guy in the front row who was clearly not a beginner. And he was popping up handstands and doing all these things. And I was really irritated because he was intimidating the rest of the class. And that's not what the practice is about. So I started asking questions to the class. I started asking things like, is your practice serving you? Or are you serving your practice? Or is your practice serving your ego? Like what's happening here? And those questions came from a place of irritation, but one thing I know from teaching yoga for many years is that the questions that I would ask as I taught a yoga class were usually the questions I needed to ask myself.